Welcome to a new page of Halloween horror. That's right, we will be reading several different Halloween short story books in order to get into the spirit of the spooky season. We hope you enjoy these books. We will start off with an old classic, Halloween Horrors by Alan Ryan. Halloween Horrors is this great short story collection that was published in 1986. This book is a collection of stories by very different authors. He'll Come Knocking at Your Door with Robert R. McCammon, which is today's story. Eyes by Charles L. Grant. The Nixon Mask by Whitley Strieber. Samhain Fies by Peter Tremaine. Trickster by Steve Rasnick Tim. Miss Mac by Michael McDowell. Hollow Eyes by Guyan Smith. The Halloween House by Alan Ryan. Three Faces of the Night by Craig Shaw Gardner. Pumpkin by Bill Pronzini. Lover in the Wildwood by Frank Belknap Long. Apples by Ramsey Campbell. And Pranks by Robert Bloch. This is a collection of amazing stories. I found this when I was a very young child. Highly enjoyed it. And now I'm going to present this for a whole new generation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our first story. He'll Come Knocking at Your Door.
Trick or treat.
Halloween Horrors. Halloween, that most macabre and memorable of evenings. A time when ghouls and goblins walk the streets and menace lurks in every moving shadow. Discover now within these pages Halloween horrors you never knew existed, as 13 modern masters of terror pay homage to that dark and lonely night. Gathered together by acclaimed writer Alan Ryan, these never-before tales come guaranteed to chill the bone and stun the imagination. Here, you'll shiver at the Nixon Mask as Whitley Strieber delivers a midnight madness, presidential style. You'll join in Pranks as Robert Bloch creates a twilight world where trick-or-treat can be a matter of life and death. You'll visit Hell on Earth as Robert R. McCammon summons the devil and he'll come knocking at your door. And you'll savor the fruit of all evil as Bill Pronzini's pumpkin spawns its deadly seed. So now, beware a full moon is on the rise. And these and other stories wait impatiently to be read. But lest you forget, lock the locks and light the lamp. No one is safe when Halloween Horrors begins. Halloween Horrors edited by Alan Ryan. Copyright 1986, Doubleday & Company, Inc., Garden City, New York. Introduction. Halloween Night by Alan Ryan. Halloween night is so damp and so chill. A night of black evil, a night of cold ill. It's dark in the evening, then darker still on Halloween night. Halloween night is the one night to dread, a night for all spirits to feed and be fed, and to dance and to prance on the night of the dead, on Halloween night. Halloween night is a bonfire that's bright with a flame that's a friendly and flickering light until ghostly spirits float into your sight, on Halloween night. Halloween night is a pumpkin that grins. To protect you from goblins who'll stick you with pins, but when you are dead, it's the goblin who wins. On Halloween night. Halloween night is the night to beware. For ghosts are dishonest and goblins unfair, so face them and fight them, my child, if you dare. On Halloween night. He'll Come Knocking at Your Door by Robert R. McCammon. Robert R. McCammon is a personable and easygoing fellow who lives in Birmingham, Alabama. His first 4 novels, all published as paperback originals, won him a wide following: Bail, Bethany's Sin, The Night Boat, and They Thirst. That last one is a particularly wild and colorful romp of a horror novel with everything from a crazed albino motorcyclist to a mad mortician. Since then, his novels included the well-received Mystery Walk and Usher's Passing, which chronicles the dark lives of the descendants of Poe's fictional family. McCammon seldom writes short stories. For this one, he draws on his southern background to take us, on the darkest night of the year, into the deep South. Very deep indeed. He'll Come Knocking at Your Door. In the deep South, Halloween Day is usually shirt-sleeve weather. But when the sun begins to sink, there's a foretaste of winter in the air. Pools of shadow deepen and lengthen, and the Alabama hills are transformed into moody tapestries of orange and black. When Dan Burgess got home from the cement plant in Barrymore Crossing, he found Karen and Jamie working over a tray of homemade candies in the shape of pumpkins. Jamie, 3 years old and as curious as a chipmunk, was in a hurry to try out the candy. "Those are for the trick-or-treaters, hon," Karen explained patiently for the third or fourth time. Both mother and daughter were blonde, though Jamie had inherited Dan's dark brown eyes. Karen's eyes were as blue as an Alabama lake on a sunny day. As Dan hugged his wife from behind and peered over her shoulder at the candies, he felt a sense of satisfaction that made life seem deliciously complete. He was a tall man, his face lean and rugged from hard outdoor labor. He had curly dark brown hair and a beard in need of trimming. "Looks pretty Halloweeny around here, folks," he drawled, lifted Jamie into his arms when she reached up for him. "Pumpkins," Jamie said gleefully. "Hope we get some trick-or-treaters tonight," Dan said. "Hard to tell if we will or not, this far from town." Their home, a rented 2-bedroom farmhouse set off the main highway on a couple of acres of rolling woodland, was part of a subdivision of Barrymore Crossing called Essex. The business district of Barrymore Crossing was 4 miles to the east, and the 35 or so inhabitants of the Essex community lived in houses similar to Dan's, comfortable places surrounded by woods where deer, quail, possum, and fox were common sights. At night, Dan could sit on his front porch and see the distant porch lights of other Essex houses up in the hills. It was a quiet, peaceful place. Unlucky, too, Dan knew. All sorts of good things had happened to them since they'd moved here from Birmingham after the steel mill shut down in February. "Might have a few." Karen began to make eyes on the pumpkins with little silver dots of candy. "Mrs. Crosley said they always have a group of kids from town. If we didn't have treats for them, they'd probably egg our house." "Halloween!" Jamie pointed excitedly toward the pumpkins, wriggling to be set down. "Oh, I almost forgot." Karen licked a silver dot from her finger and walked across the kitchen to the cork bulletin board next to the telephone. She took off one of the pieces of paper stuck there by a blue plastic pin. "Mr. Hathaway called at 4. She gave him the note, and he set Jamie down. "He wants you to go over to his place for some kind of meeting." "Meeting?" Dan looked at the note. It said, "Roy Hathaway, his house, 6:30. Hathaway was the real estate agent who'd rented them this house. He lived across the highway up where the valley curved into the hills. "On Halloween? Did he say what for?" "No. He did say it was important, though. He said you were expected and it was something that couldn't be explained over the phone." Dan grunted softly. He liked Roy Hathaway, who'd bent over backwards to find them this place. Dan glanced at his new Belova wristwatch, which he'd won by being the 1,000th person to buy a pickup truck from a dealership in Birmingham. It was almost 5:30. Time enough for a shower and a ham sandwich, and then he'd go see what was so important. "Okay," he said. "I'll go find out what he wants." "Somebody'll be a clown by the time you get back," Karen said, glancing slyly at Jamie. Me'll be a clown, Daddy." Dan grinned at her, and his heart full went back to take his shower. Darkness was falling fast as Dan drove his white pickup truck along the winding country road that led to Hathaway's place. His headlights picked out a deer as it bolted in front of the truck. Beyond the ridge of hills to the west, the setting sun tinted the sky a vivid orange. Meeting, Dan thought uneasily. What was it that couldn't wait? He wondered if it might have something to do with the last rent check. No. His days of rubber checks and irate landlords were over. There was plenty of money in the bank. In August, Dan had received a letter that he'd won $5,000 in a contest at the Food Giant store in Barrymore Crossing. Karen didn't even recall filling out an entry slip. Dan had been able to pay off the new truck and buy Karen the color television she'd been wanting. He was making more money than ever before since his promotion in April from gravel shoveler to unit supervisor at the cement plant. So money wasn't the problem. What was then? He loved the Essex community. It was fresh air and bird songs and a low-lying morning mist that clung like lace in the autumn trees. After the smog and harshness of Birmingham, After the trauma of losing his job and being on unemployment, Essex was a gentle, soul-soothing blessing. Dan believed in luck. In hindsight, it was even good luck that he'd lost his job at the mill, because if he hadn't, he never would have found Essex. One day in May, he'd walked into the hardware and sporting goods store in Barrymore Crossing and admired a double-barreled Remington shotgun in a display case. The manager had come over, and they talked about guns and hunting for the better part of an hour. As Dan had started to leave, the manager unlocked the display case and said, "Dan, I want you to try this baby out. Go ahead and take it. It's a new model, and the Remington people want to know how folks like it. You take it home with you and bring me back a wild turkey or two. And if you like that gun, tell other folks where they can buy one, you hear?" It was amazing, Dan thought. He and Karen were living some kind of fantastic dream. The promotion at the plant had come right out of the blue. People respected him. Karen and Jamie were happier than he'd ever seen them. Just last month, a woman Karen had met at the Baptist church gave them a rich harvest of garden vegetables that would last them through the autumn. The only remotely bad thing that had happened since they moved to Essex, Dan recalled, was when he'd made a fool of himself in Roy Hathaway's office. He'd sliced his finger on the edge of a piece of paper and had bled all over the lease. It was a stupid thing to remember, he knew, but it stuck in his mind because he hoped it wasn't a bad omen. Now he knew nothing could be further from the truth. He rounded a corner and saw Roy's house ahead. The front porch lights were on, and the lights showed through most of the windows. The driveway was packed with cars, most of which Dan recognized as belonging to other Essex residents. What's going on, he wondered. Community meeting on Halloween? He parked his truck next to Tom Paulson's new Cadillac and walked up the front porch steps to the door. As he knocked, a long, keening animal cry came from the woods behind Hathaway's house. Bobcat, he thought. The woods are full of them. Laura Hathaway, an attractive gray-haired woman in her mid-50s, answered the door with a cheerful, "Happy Halloween, Dan!" "Hi. Happy Halloween." He stepped into the house and could smell the aromatic cherry pipe tobacco Roy favored. The Hathaways had some nice oil paintings on their walls, and all their furniture looked new. "What's going on?" "Oh, the men are down in the rumpus room," she explained. "They're having their little yearly get-together." She started to lead him to another door that would take him downstairs. She limped a bit when she walked. Several years ago, Dan understood, a lawnmower had sliced off a few of the toes on her right foot. "Looks like everyone in Essex is here, with all those cars outside." She smiled, her kindly face crinkling. "Everyone is here now. Go on down and make yourself at home." He descended the stairs, and he heard Roy's husky voice down there. "Janie's gold earrings, the ones with the little pearls. Carl, this year it's one of Tiger's new kittens, the one with the black markings on its legs, and that axe you got at the hardware store last week. Phil, he wants one of your piglets and the pickled okra Marcy put up in the cupboard." When Dan reached the bottom of the stairs, Roy stopped talking. The rumpus room, carpeted in bright red because Roy was a Crimson Tide fan, was filled with men from the Essex community. Roy, a hefty man with white hair and friendly, deep-set blue eyes, was sitting in a chair in the midst of them, reading from some kind of list. The others sat around him, listening intently. Roy looked up at Dan, as did the other men, and puffed thoughtfully on his pipe. "Howdy, Dan. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and sit a spell." "I got your message. What kind of meeting is this?" He glanced around, saw faces he knew. Steve Mallory, Phil Kane, Carl Lansing, Andy McCutcheon, and more. A pot of coffee, cups, and a platter of sandwiches were placed on a table on one side of the room. "Be with you in a minute," Roy said. While Dan, still puzzled about what was so important on Halloween, poured himself a cup of coffee, he listened to Roy reading from the list he held. "Okay, where were we? Oh, Phil. That's it for you, I reckon. Next is Tom. This year it's that ship model you put together, a pair of Ann's shoes, the gray ones she brought in Birmingham, and Tom Jr.'s G.I. Joe doll. Andy, he wants..." "Huh?" Dan thought as he sipped at the hot black coffee. He looked at Tom, who seemed to have released a breath he'd been holding for a long time. Tom's model of old Ironsides had taken him months to put together, Dan knew. Dan's gaze snagged other eyes that quickly looked away. He noted that Mitch Brantley, whose wife had just had their first child in July, looked ill. Mitch's face was the color of wet cotton. A haze of smoke hung in the air from Roy's pipe and several other smokers' cigarettes. Cups rattled against saucers. Dan looked at Aaron Green, who stared back at him through strange glassy eyes. Aaron's wife, Dan had heard, had died of a heart attack last year about this time. Dan had shown him pictures of her, a robust-looking brunette in her late 30s. Your golf clubs, your silver cufflinks, and Tweety Bird, Roy continued. Annie McCutcheon laughed nervously. In his pallid, fleshy face, his eyes were dark and troubled. Roy, my little girl loves that canary. I mean, she's real attached to it. Roy smiled. It was a tight, false smile, and something about it starting a knot of tension growing in Dan's stomach. You can buy her another one, Andy, he said. Can't you? Sure, but she loves... One canary's just like another. He drew at his pipe, and when he lifted his hand to hold the bowl, the overhead light glinted off the large diamond ring he wore. Excuse me, gents, Dan stepped forward. I sure would like for someone to tell me what this is all about. My wife and little girl are getting ready for Halloween. So are we, Roy replied, and blew out a plume of smoke. So are we. He traced his finger down the list. Dan saw the paper was mottled and dirty. It looked as if it had been used to wipe out the inside of a garbage can. The writing on it was scrawled and spiky. Dan, Roy said and tapped the paper, this year he wants 2 things from you. First is a set of fingernail clippings, your own fingernails. The second is... Hold on. Dan tried to smile but couldn't. I don't get this. How about starting from the beginning? Roy stared at him for a long, silent moment. Dan felt other eyes on him, watching him carefully. On the opposite side of the room, Walter Ferguson suddenly began quietly sobbing. Oh, Roy said. Sure. It's your first Halloween in Essex, isn't it? Right. And... Sit down, Dan. Roy motioned toward an empty chair near him. Come on, sit down, I'll tell you. Dan didn't like the feeling in this room. There was too much tension and fear in here. Walter's sobbing was louder. Tom, Roy said, take Walter out for a breath of fresh air, won't you? Tom muttered an assent and helped the crying man out of his chair. When they left the rumpus room, Roy struck a kitchen match to relight his pipe and looked calmly at Dan Burgess. So tell me, Dan urged as he sat down. He did smile this time, but the smile would not stick. It's Halloween, Roy explained as if speaking to a retarded child. We're going over the Halloween list. Dan laughed involuntarily. Is this a joke, gents? What kind of Halloween list? Roy's thick white brows came together as he gathered his thoughts. Dan realized the other man was wearing the same dark red sweater he'd worn the day Dan had signed the lease and cut his finger. Call it a trick-or-treat list, Dan. You know, we all like you. You're a good man. We can't think of a better neighbor to have in Essex. He glanced around at some of the others, and they nodded. Essex is a very special place to live, Dan. You must know that by now. Sure, it's great. Karen and I love it here. We all do. Some of us have lived here for a long time. We appreciate the good life we have here. And in Essex, Dan, Halloween is a very special night of the year. Dan frowned. I'm not following you. Roy produced a gold pocket watch, popped it open to look at the time, then closed it again. When he lifted his gaze, his eyes seemed darker and more powerful than Dan had ever seen them. They made him shiver to his soul. Do you believe in the devil? Roy asked. Again, Dan laughed. What are we doing? Telling spooky stories? He looked around the room. No one else was laughing. When you came to Essex, Roy said softly, you were a loser. Down on your luck, no job, money almost gone. Your credit rating was 0. You had an old car that was ready for the junkyard. Now, I want you to think back on all the good things that have happened to you, all the things you might have taken as a run of good luck since you've been part of our community. You've gotten everything you wanted, haven't you? Money's come to you like never before. You got yourself a brand new truck, a promotion at the plant. There'll be more good things to come in the years ahead if you cooperate. Cooperate? He didn't like the sound of that word. Cooperate how? With the list, like we all do every Halloween. Every October 31st, I find a list just like this one under the welcome mat at our front door. Why I've been chosen to handle it, I don't know. Maybe because I help bring new people in. These items on the list are to be left in front of your door on Halloween. In the morning, they're gone. He comes during the night, Dan, and he takes them away with him. This is a Halloween joke, isn't it? Dan grinned. Chin's had me going. That's a hell of an act to put on just to scare the crap out of me. But Roy's face remained impassive. Smoke seeped from a corner of his wrinkled mouth. The things, Roy continued evenly, have to be collected and left out before midnight, Dan. If you don't collect the items and leave them for him, he'll come knocking at your door. And you don't want that, Dan. You really don't. A chunk of ice seemed to have jammed itself in Dan's throat, while the rest of his body felt feverish. The devil in Essex? Collecting things like golf clubs and cufflinks, ship models and pet canaries? You're crazy, he managed to say. This isn't a joke. You've dropped both your oars in the water. It's no joke, and he ain't crazy, Phil Kane said, sitting behind Roy. Phil was a large, humorless man who raised pigs on a farm about a mile away. It's just once a year, just on Halloween. Last year alone, I won one of them magazine sweepstakes. It was $15,000 in one whack. The year before that, an uncle I didn't even know I had died left me 100 acres of land in California. We get free stuff in the mail all the time. It's just once a year. We have to give him what he wants. Laura and I go to art auctions in Birmingham, Roy said. We always get what we want for the lowest bid, and the paintings are always worth 5 or 10 times what we pay. Last Halloween, he asked for a lock of Laura's hair and one of my old shirts with blood on it where I cut myself shaving. You remember that trip to Bermuda the real estate company gave us last summer? I've been given a huge expense account, too, and no matter what I charge, nobody asks any questions. He gives us everything we want. Trick or treat, Dan thought crazily. He envisioned some hulking, monstrous form lugging off a set of golf clubs, one of Phil's piglets, and Tom's old Ironsides. It was insane. Did these men really believe they were making sacrifices to some satanic trick-or-treater? Roy lifted his eyebrows. You didn't return the shotgun, did you? Nor the money? You didn't refuse the promotion? I earned that promotion, Dan insisted, but his voice was strained and weak, and it shamed him. You signed the agreement in blood, Roy said. And Dan remembered the drops of blood falling from his cut finger onto the white paper of the lease right underneath his name. Whether you knew it or not, you agreed to something that's been going on in Essex for over 100 years. You can have anything and everything you want, Dan, if you give him what he wants on one special night of the year. My Lord, Dan whispered. He felt dizzy and sick. If it was true, what had he stumbled into? You said he wants 2 things from me. The fingernail clippings, and what else? Roy looked at the list and cleared his throat. He wants the clippings, and he wants the first joint of the little finger of your child's left hand. Dan sat motionless. He stared straight ahead and feared for an awful moment that he would start laughing and giggle himself all the way to an asylum. It's really not much, Roy said. There won't be a lot of blood, will there be, Carl? Carl Lansing, who worked as a butcher at the food giant in Barrymore Crossing, raised his left hand to show Dan Burgess. Not much pain if you do it quick, with a cleaver. One sharp blow will snap the bone. She won't feel a lot of pain if you do it fast. Dan swallowed. Carl's slick-back black hair gleamed with vitalis under the light. Dan had always wondered exactly how Carl had lost the thumb of his left hand. If you don't put what he wants in front of your door, Andy McCutcheon said, he'll come in after it. And they'll take more than he asked for in the first place, Dan. God help you if he has to knock at your door. Dan's eyes felt like frozen stones in his rigid face. He stared across the room at Mitch Brantley, who appeared to be about to either faint or throw up. Dan thought of Mitch's new son, and he did not want to think about what might be on the list beside either Mitch's or Walter Ferguson's name. He rose unsteadily from his chair. It was not that he believed the devil was coming to his house tonight for a bizarre trick-or-treat that frightened him so deeply. It was that he knew they believed, and he didn't know how to deal with it. Dan, Roy Hathaway said gently, we're all in this together. It's not so bad, really it isn't. Usually all he wants are little things that don't matter very much. Mitch made a soft, strangled groaning sound. Dan flinched, but Roy paid no attention. Dan had the sudden urge to leap at Roy, grab him by the front of that blood-red sweater and shake him until he split open. Once in a while, he takes something of value, Roy said, but not very often. And he always gives us back so much more than he takes. You're crazy. All of you. Give him what he wants. Steve Mallory spoke in the strong bass voice that was so distinctive in the Baptist church choir on Sunday mornings. Do it, Dan. Don't make him knock at your door. Do it, Roy told him, for your own sake and your family's. Dan backed away from them. Then he turned and ran up the stairs, ran out of the house as Laura Hathaway was coming out of the kitchen with a big bowl of pretzels, ran down the front steps and across the lawn to his pickup. Near Steve Mallory's new silver Chevy, Walter and Tom were standing together. Dan heard Walter sob. Not her ear, Tom. Dear God, not her whole ear. Dan got into his truck and left twin streaks of rubber on the pavement as he drove away. Dead leaves whirled through the chilly air as Dan pulled up into his driveway, got out, and ran up the front porch steps. Karen had taped a cardboard skeleton to the door. His heart was pounding, and he decided to take no chances. If this was an elaborate joke, they could laugh their butts off at him, but he was getting Karen and Jamie out of here. Halfway home, a thought had occurred to him that almost made him pull off the road to puke. If the list had demanded a lock of Jamie's hair, would he have given it without question? How about her fingernail clippings? A whole fingernail? An earlobe? And if he'd given any of those things, what would be on the trick-or-treat list next year and the year after that? Not much blood if you do it quick. Karen! He shouted as he unlocked the door and went in. The house was too quiet. Karen! Lord, Dan, what are you yelling about? She came into the front room from the hallway, followed by Jamie in clown makeup, an oversized red blouse, patched little blue jeans, and sneakers covered with yellow, round, happy face stickers. Dan knew he must look like walking death because Karen stopped as if she'd run into a wall when she saw him. What happened? She asked fearfully. Listen to me. Don't ask any questions. He wiped the sheen of sweat off his forehead with a trembling hand. Jamie's soft brown eyes reflected the terror he'd brought into the house with him. We're leaving right now. We're going to drive to Birmingham and check into a hotel. It's Halloween, Karen said. We might have some trick-or-treaters. Please, don't argue with me. We got to get out of here right now. Dan jerked his gaze away from his child's left hand. He'd been looking at her little finger and thinking horrible thoughts. Right now, he repeated. Jamie was stunned and about to cry. On a table beside her was a plate with the Halloween candies on it, grinning pumpkins with silver eyes and licorice mouths. We have to go, Dan said hoarsely. I can't tell you why, but we have to. Before Karen could say anything else, Dan told her to gather whatever she wanted, toothpaste, a jacket, underwear, while he went out and started the truck. But hurry, he urged her. For God's sake, hurry. Outside, dead leaves snapped at his cheeks and sailed past his head. He slid past the pickup's wheel, put the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine made one long, groaning noise, rattled, and died. Dan, close to panic, looked around. He'd never had any problems with the truck before. He pumped the accelerator and tried again. The engine was stone cold dead, and all the warning lights, brake, fluid, engine oil, battery, even gasoline, flashed red on the instrument panel. Of course, he realized, of course. He'd paid off the truck with the money he'd won. The truck had been given to him while he was a resident of Essex, and now, whatever was coming to their house tonight didn't want him driving that truck away from Essex. They could run for it, run along the road, but what if they ran into the Halloween visitor there in the lonely darkness? What if it came up behind them on the road, demanding its trick-or-treat like a particularly nasty child? He tried the truck again. Dead. Inside the house, Dan slammed the door and locked it. He went to the kitchen door and locked that too, his wife and daughter watching him as if he'd lost his mind. Dan shouted, "Karen, check all the windows. Make sure they're shut tight. Hurry!" He went to the closet and took out a shotgun and got a box of shells off the shelf. He opened the box, put it on the table next to the pumpkin candies, broke open the gun's breech, and stuffed 2 shells into the chambers. Then he closed the breech and looked up as Karen and Jamie returned, clinging to each other. "All the windows are shut," Karen whispered, her scared blue eyes flickering back and forth from Dan's face to the shotgun. "Dan, what's wrong with you?" "Something's coming to our door tonight," he replied. "Something terrible. We're going to have to hold it off. I don't know if we can, but we're going to have to try. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "It's Halloween," she said, and he saw she thought he was totally cracked. "The telephone," he thought suddenly, and ran for it. He picked up the receiver and dialed for the operator in Barrymore Crossing to call for a police car. "Officer, the devil's on his way to our house tonight. We don't have his favorite kind of candy." But on the other end of the line was a piercing crackle of static that sounded like a peal of eerie laughter. Through the static, Dan heard things that made him believe he'd truly hurtled over the edge. The crazy theme music from a Porky Pig cartoon, a crash of cymbals, the military drumming of a marching band, assorted gurgles and gasps and moans as if he'd been plugged into a graveyard party line. Dan dropped the receiver, and it dangled from its cord like a lynched corpse. "Have to think," he told himself. "Figure things out. Gotta hold him off." He looked at the fireplace and felt a new hammer blow of horror. "Dear Lord," he shouted, "we gotta block up the chimney." Dan got on his knees, reached up the chimney, and closed the flue. There were already pine logs kindling and newspapers in the fireplace ready for the first cold night of the year. He went into the kitchen and got a box of red-top matches and put them in the breast pocket of his shirt. When he came back into the room, Jamie was crying, and Karen was holding her tightly, whispering, "Shh, darling, shh." She watched her husband the way one would watch a dog with foam on its mouth. Dan pulled a chair about 10 feet from the front door and sat down with the shotgun across his knees. His eyes were sunken into his head and ringed with purple. He looked at his new Belova watch. Somehow the crystal had shattered and the hands had snapped off. "Dan," Karen said. Then she too started to cry. I love you, honey," he told her. You know I love both of you, don't you? I swear I do. I won't let him in. I won't give him what he wants, because if I do that, what will he take next year? I love you both, and I want you to remember that." "Oh, Dan." "They think I'm going to do it. They think I'm going to do it and leave it outside the door for him," Dan said. His hands were gripped tightly around the shotgun, his knuckles white. "They think I could just take a cleaver and—" The lights flickered. Karen screamed. Jamie's wail joined hers. Dan felt his face contorting with fear. The lights flickered, and went out. "He's coming," Dan rasped. "He's coming soon." He stood up, walked to the fireplace, bent down, struck a match. It took 4 matches to get the fire going right. Its orange light turned the room into a Halloween chamber of horrors, and smoke repelled from the blocked flue, swept around the walls like searching spirits. Karen was pressed against the wall, and Jamie's clown makeup was streaming down her cheeks. Dan returned to the chair, his eyes stinging with smoke, and watched the door. He didn't know how much longer it was when he sensed something on the front porch. Smoke was filling the house, but the room had suddenly become bone-achingly cold. He thought he heard something scratching out there on the porch, searching around the door for the items that weren't there. "He'll come knocking at your door, and you don't want that. You really don't." "Dan?" "Shh," he warned her. "Listen. He's out there." "Him? Who? I don't hear—" There was a knock at the door, like a sledgehammer striking the wood. Dan saw the door tremble through the smoke haze. The knock was followed by a second with more force, then a third that made the door bend inward like cardboard. "Go away!" Dan shouted. "There's nothing for you here." Silence. It's all a trick, he thought. Roy and Tom and Carl and Steve and all the rest are out there in the dark, laughing, fit to bust a gut. But the room was getting viciously cold. Dan shivered, saw his breath float away past his face. Something scraped on the roof above their heads like claws seeking a weak chink in the shingles. "Go away!" Dan's voice cracked. "Go away!" The scraping stopped. After a long moment of silence, something smashed against the roof like an anvil being dropped. The entire house groaned. Jamie screamed, and Karen shouted, "What is it, Dan? What is it out there?" Immediately following was a chorus of laughter from beyond the front door. Someone said, "Okay, I guess that's enough." A different voice called, "Hey, Dan, you can open up now. Just kidding." A third voice said, "Trick or treat, Danny boy." He recognized Carl Lansing's voice. There was more laughter, more whooping cries of "trick or treat." Dan rose to his feet. "It's a joke. A brutal, ridiculous joke." "Open the door," Carl called. "We can't wait to see your face." Dan almost cried, but there was rage building in him, and he thought he might just aim the shotgun at them and threaten to shoot their balls off. Were they all crazy? How had they managed the phone and the lights? Was this some kind of insane initiation to Essex? He went to the door on shaky legs, unlocked it behind him. Karen said suddenly, Dan, don't!" and opened the door. Carl Lansing stood on the porch. His black hair was slicked back, his eyes as bright as new pennies. He looked like the cat that had swallowed the canary. "You fools!" Dan raged. "You know what kind of scare you people put into me and my family? I ought to shoot your—" And then he stopped, because he realized Carl was standing alone on the porch. Carl grinned. His teeth were black. "Trick or treat," he whispered, and raised the axe that he'd been holding behind his back. With a cry of terror, Dan stumbled backward and raised the shotgun. The thing that had assumed Carl's shape oozed across the threshold, orange firelight glinting off the upraised axe blade. Dan squeezed the shotgun triggers, but the gun didn't go off. Neither barrel would fire. "Jammed," he thought wildly, and broke open the breech to clear it. There were no shells in the shotgun. Jammed into the chambers were Karen's pumpkin candies. "Trick or treat, Dan!" the thing wailed. "Trick or treat!" Dan struck into the Carl thing's stomach with the butt of the shotgun. From its mouth sprayed a mess of yellow canary feathers, pieces of a kitten, and what might have been a piglet. Dan hit it again, and the entire body collapsed like an exploding gas bag. Then he grabbed Karen's hand in a frantic blur of motion and was pulling her with him out the door. She held on to Jamie, and they ran down the porch steps and across the grass, along the driveway and the road and toward the main highway, with the Halloween wind clutching around them. Dan looked back and saw nothing but darkness. Jamie shrieked in tune with the wind. The distant lights of other Essex houses glinted in the hills like cold stars. They reached the highway. Dan shouldered Jamie. Still, they ran into the night along the roadside where the high weeds caught at their ankles. "Look!" Karen cried out. "Somebody's coming, Dan, look!" Headlights were approaching. Dan stood in the middle of the road, frantically waving. The vehicle, a gray Volkswagen van, began to slow down. At the wheel was a woman in a witch costume, and next to her 2 children dressed like ghosts peered out the window. "People from Barrymore Crossing," Dan realized. "Thank God. Help us," he begged. "Please. We got to get out of here." "You in trouble?" the woman asked. "You have an accident or something?" Yes, an accident. Please, just get us to the police station at Barrymore Crossing, okay? Please, I'll pay you. Just please get us there." The woman paused. Then she said, "Okay, climb in." Dan pulled open the van's side door. They started off, the engine backfiring towards Barrymore Crossing. "I don't see no accident," the woman said. "You have a car wreck or what?" Dan shook his head. The 2 ghost children were watching him over the front seat. In his arms, Jamie was dazed and shaking. "We're okay," he managed to say to Karen and took her hand. "We're safe now, honey." And something wet dripped onto his cheek. He looked up at the van's ceiling. The van had teeth, long rows of triangular, serrated teeth. And as his mind cracked and he began to laugh, he saw the sticky fluid dripping down off the teeth, saw in the green glow of the instrument panel more teeth pushing up from the van's soft, wet, gray sides and floorboard. His last coherent thought, as Karen's scream filled his head, was that the devil sure could come up with one hell of a costume. "Trick or treat, Dan," the shape of the wheel said. and the entire van smashed shut like a huge mouth, the teeth grinding down until bone and flesh were pulverized and unrecognizable. Then the van, looking more like a large shiny roach, scuttled off the road toward the Essex woods. It changed shape into something that would drive a man mad to behold, and then it was gone into the hills with its belly full of Halloween treats.
Trick or treat, trick or treat. When you hear the doorbell ring, ding, 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 ding. Trick or treat, trick or treat. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. Painting up your cheeks and nose, dressing up in funny clothes. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. Dum, 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 dum. Cinderella, Peter Pan, walking with a monster man. Dum, 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 dum. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. La, 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 la. Goblins, witches, all about. Get you if you don't watch out. La, 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 la. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat.